The history of military aviation is full of fascinating paradoxes. Often, highly successful aircraft were designed for one specific job, only to find their true calling in a completely different role. The night fighter is a classic example. From the moment they first appeared in 1940 right up to the end of World War II, night fighting relied almost entirely on improvised conversions of existing aircraft. And the most interesting part is just how incredibly successful these modified airframes turned out to be. The situation on the other side of the English Channel was critical. When British bombers started striking Germany in the summer of 1940, it came as a massive shock to the Luftwaffe High Command. Up until that point, German generals had been living in a state of complete complacency. Only a select few, including the future general of the Night Fighter Force, Joseph Kammhuber, understood just how absolutely critical night fighters would be to the country's air defense network. Because the High Command had entirely ignored the issue, the Germans had no dedicated night fighters, and just like the British, had to rely heavily on improvisation. With every passing month, the British night bomber offensive grew more intense. Against this backdrop, it became obvious just how inadequate aircraft like the Bf-110 really were for the escalating air war. In the summer of 1942, the German Technical Office issued brand new requirements to the leading aircraft manufacturers. Focke-Wulf was ordered to develop a new dedicated night fighter. Meanwhile, Heinkel was directed to adapt a project they had already started 2 years earlier. The fates of these two projects went in completely different directions. Focke-Wulf's Ta-154 never actually entered service. Meanwhile, its direct competitor, Heinkel's He-219, proved to be one of the most effective combat aircraft of World War II. However, due to endless bureaucratic red tape, the fighter never reached its full potential. If this aircraft had entered mass production as originally planned, it could have drastically changed the course of the night air war over the Third Reich. The story of the He-219 actually starts with Project 1060, which began in the summer of 1940 when the design team at Marienehe had some downtime between government contracts. The engineers envisioned a universal fighter, an advanced multi-role aircraft capable of acting as a heavy long-range fighter, a reconnaissance plane, a high-speed bomber, and even a torpedo bomber. Since the Heinkel designers were not tied down by strict military requirements at the time, they came up with a genuinely revolutionary aircraft for its day. The plane featured some incredibly advanced tech for the early 1940s, a fully pressurized cockpit, tricycle landing gear, and even remote-controlled defensive guns. But for the conservative technical office, this bold mix of innovations just seemed way too risky. The German generals especially hated the nosewheel arrangement, brushing it off as some sort of American fad. As a result, this brilliant design was simply rejected and shelved. The ambitious Project 1060 would have likely spent a lot more time gathering dust if it was not for one crucial document put together by Major General Joseph Kammhuber. It was based on honest conversations with frontline night fighter pilots and urgently called for the creation of a completely new, dedicated night fighter. This new aircraft had to be capable of taking on heavy British bombers like the Stirling, Halifax, and Manchester. The report made it perfectly clear. The reliable Bf-110s had been great at shooting down earlier bombers like the Whitley, Hampton, and Wellington. However, they simply would not be able to handle these newer, more powerful British aircraft once they started attacking in massive formations. But the German High Command stubbornly refused to face the facts. The Reich Air Ministry was arrogant enough to believe there was absolutely no need to upgrade their night fighter forces. Realizing it would be impossible to break through the wall of bureaucracy, Joseph Kammhuber took a radical step. He went straight to Adolf Hitler, and surprisingly, his arguments worked. With support from the very top, Kammhuber immediately pushed the technical department to issue an urgent contract for a dedicated night fighter. He had personally seen the blueprints for Project 1060 at the Heinkel factory and was convinced of its potential. So Joseph Kammhuber personally asked designer Ernst Heinkel to turn this concept into a full-fledged night fighter. The technical department officially gave the project the green light, assigning it the designation He-219. Detailed technical development kicked into high gear in Marienehe as early as January 1942. The core concept was a twin-engine aircraft powered by massive DB603G engines from Daimler-Benz. They planned to equip it with the state-of-the-art FUG-212 Lichtenstein radar, and formidable armament. This included a pair of 15mm MG-151 cannons built into the wing roots, along with either two 20mm MG-151 cannons or one massive 30mm Mk-103 cannon in the lower fuselage. The aircraft also featured upper and lower remote-controlled gun turrets, operated by the observer, each armed with twin 13mm MG-131 machine guns. On top of that, it could carry a bomb load of up to 4,400 pounds. Interestingly, an early parallel concept was also on the drawing boards. A high-altitude variant with a three-man crew, modified DB614 engines, and a significantly longer wingspan stretched from 59 feet to an impressive 93.5 feet. Under wartime conditions, however, all efforts had to be focused on getting the first HE-219A prototype off the ground, and this high-altitude concept was set aside. That said, its landing gear design was deemed more reliable than the one originally planned, and was carried over to the main production aircraft. To save as much time as possible, the drafting of new blueprints ran simultaneously with the assembly of the first prototype. By March 1942, the engineering team had already finished around 80% of the technical drawings. But the war forced some harsh setbacks. During a massive British air raid, most of these documents went up in flames. A subsequent bombing raid in April completely wiped out the remaining blueprints. However, the half-assembled prototype miraculously survived. Desperate not to halt their progress, the engineers moved their drafting tables right onto the assembly floor, working side by side with the mechanics. Eventually, the constant threat of fresh airstrikes forced officials to evacuate the entire design department to Vienna. On top of that, the development of the HE-219 had already run into serious bureaucratic roadblocks. Luftwaffe production chief Erhard Milch issued a directive outright banning the mass production of this fighter. The official reason was a desire to cut down on the number of different types of combat aircraft in production. Milch genuinely believed the new HE-219's missions could be handled just as effectively by aircraft already in steady production. Exactly why Milch pushed back so hard is not entirely clear, but the complicated personal friction between Erhard Milch, Ernst Heinkel, and Josef Kammhuber almost certainly played a role. Realizing that a decent alternative to the HE-219 simply did not exist, Josef Kammhuber wasted no time. The very day after a factory visit in August 1942, he headed straight to the Reich Aviation Ministry and pushed through a contract for the first 100 HE-219s. As a compromise, they decided to temporarily install the less powerful DB603A engines until the final DB603G versions were fully ready. While these behind-the-scenes battles dragged on, the aircraft's design was constantly evolving. The remote-controlled gun turrets had worked flawlessly during ground tests. However, they proved incredibly unreliable in actual flight. The hydraulic system simply lacked the power to confidently aim the heavy weapons against severe aerodynamic drag. The barrels would flex and the guns would fire nowhere near the point indicated by the cockpit gun sight. On top of that, the periscopic sight itself was awkward to use and did not allow the pilot to effectively track an enemy target in the dark. The complex hydraulic system also created constant maintenance headaches. Furthermore, the extra weight and massive aerodynamic drag from these turrets completely negated any defensive advantages. Ultimately, they decided to ditch them entirely. Instead, they simply mounted a single 13mm MG-131 machine gun in the rear of the cockpit. This forced the engineers to rethink the entire armament layout. They mounted a powerful 20mm MG-151 cannon in each wing root and packed 4 more cannons ranging in caliber from 15 to 30 millimeters into a ventral tray under the fuselage belly. On November 15, 1942, exactly 11 months after the project kicked off, the first HE-219 prototype finally made its maiden flight. Aside from some minor longitudinal and lateral instability, the overall flight characteristics turned out to be surprisingly good. The nose landing gear made an incredibly positive impression on the test pilot, despite the technical department having so heavily criticized it previously. He particularly noted just how smoothly the aircraft handled takeoffs and landings. The first prototype featured a solid one-piece wing with a rugged stressed skin construction. Engineers positioned the engine nacelles right between the flaps and ailerons. The fuselage had a somewhat unusual rectangular cross-section. The roomy cockpit seated a two-man crew back-to-back, giving them much better situational awareness. Right behind them in the fuselage were three self-sealing fuel tanks holding 290, 132, and 264 gallons respectively. The nose wheel retracted backward under the cockpit during flight by rotating 90 degrees, while the massive main gear struts with their twin wheels retracted straight back into the engine nacelles. The heart of the aircraft was its powerful DB603A engines with annular radiators. On takeoff, they cranked out 1,750 horsepower. Climbing to nearly 6,890 feet, the output increased to 1,850 horsepower. Even up at 18,700 feet, it still held steady at 1,625 horsepower. At high altitudes, her special ejector exhaust stacks added another 286 pounds of thrust. For the initial test flights, they outfitted the aircraft with just two 20mm MG-151 cannons in the wing roots and a single 13mm MG-131 on a flexible mount in the rear of the cockpit. In this basic setup, the empty fighter weighed in at 19,930 pounds and fully loaded tipped the scales at 25,926 pounds. The results from those first test flights were very promising. The aircraft reached 379 miles per hour, achieved a climb rate hitting 1,614 feet per minute, and could cover over 1,429 miles without refueling. In February 1943, engineers installed a ventral tray holding four heavy 30mm Mk-108 cannons. But the designers made a crucial oversight. They did not include ejection ports for spent casings or ventilation for the massive buildup of propellant gases. During the very first scheduled ground test, the muzzle blast simply tore apart the fairing under the weapons bay. After the first airborne burst, the fairing violently ripped right off the aircraft. After identifying the problem, they fitted the next test prototypes with four 20mm MG-151 cannons, while still planning to arm the fighter with heavier weapons later on. The subsequent prototypes were constantly being tweaked. One received a noticeably elongated tail section, increasing the overall length from 47.6 to 50.5 feet. This enlarged tail surface completely resolved the fighter's in-flight stability issues. In mid-March 1943, yet another upgraded version took to the skies, featuring the airborne Fuji-212 Lichtenstein C-1 radar. This transformed the aircraft into a true night hunter. On March 25, 1943, the experimental HE-219 took part in a mock dogfight against a Do-217N night fighter and a fast Ju-88S bomber. The outdated Do-217N was knocked out almost immediately, completely outclassed in sheer performance. What followed was an intense turning engagement between the new fighter and the Ju-88S, with Major Stribe at the controls of the Heinkel. Thanks to its vastly superior maneuverability and power, the HE-219 easily won the duel. Pleasantly surprised by these results, the Reich Air Ministry sharply increased their order from 100 straight to 300 aircraft. In early June 1943, a small batch of pre-production night fighters arrived at Venlo Air Base in the Netherlands, assigned to the NJG-1 Night Fighter Wing for their first real tests under combat conditions. On the night of June 12th, an HE-219 piloted by Major Werner Stribe flew its very first combat mission and managed to shoot down at least 5 British heavy bombers in a single sortie. Despite this stunning result, Field Marshal Erhard Milch remained dismissive. At a conference just days later, he stated that an ace like Stribe could have shot down just as many planes flying any other fighter. Despite his blatant skepticism, Milch had no choice but to officially approve a production plan of 24 HE-219s a month, while privately knowing the factories could barely manage 10. Over the 10 days following Stribe's triumphant flight, a handful of HE-219s from the headquarters flight of NJG-1 flew 6 combat missions. Their results were nothing short of staggering. They destroyed 20 British bombers, including 6 high-speed Mosquitoes that had previously been considered practically invulnerable to German air defenses. The combat results spoke for themselves. While the bureaucratic battles over the program's future continued in the background, the engineers pressed ahead with finalizing the production configuration. The first 3 assembled airframes served as pre-production prototypes. In terms of armament, the planned mass production configuration consisted of 2 20mm MG-151 cannons in the wing roots plus two 30mm Mk-108 cannons in a ventral tray. The fighter was also fitted with an extra pair of Mk-108 cannons in a Schräge Musik installation, an upward firing configuration angled at 65 degrees, designed to ambush bombers from below by striking their unprotected bellies with 100 rounds per gun. The first working prototype of what became the initial production variant rolled off the line in July 1943. A standout feature was a massive 238-gallon ventral fuel tank mounted beneath the fuselage, along with lengthened engine nacelles. These were not just a cosmetic change. Designers housed an extra 103-gallon fuel tank in the aft section of each nacelle, significantly increasing the aircraft's range. The Lichtenstein C-1 radar was standard on the first dozen aircraft, but starting in late 1943, all new airframes began receiving the more advanced Lichtenstein SN2 radar. The first HE-219s of this kind officially entered service with the Luftwaffe in October 1943. By the end of that year, the Luftwaffe had received only 26 of these fighters, most assigned to Night Fighter Wing 1, which was relocated closer to Berlin in November to directly defend the capital. The war, however, was already taking its toll on the wing's leadership. On January 21, 1944, the unit lost its commander, Captain Manfred Müller, when his HE-219 collided mid-air with a British Lancaster heavy bomber. Müller was a true ace with 65 confirmed aerial victories. After several interim production batches that progressively refined the airframe, engines, and radar fit, the design team arrived at what would become the most numerous variant of the series. In March 1944, the Luftwaffe took delivery of its first HE-219A5 night fighter. A standout feature of this batch was the use of field conversion kits that allowed mechanics to swap out the weapons in the ventral tray right on the flight line, fitting whatever cannons happened to be in the depot at the time. All variants kept the standard wing cannons and the Schräge Musik system. Meanwhile, the RAF had started deploying Mosquito night fighters to clear the skies ahead of their heavy bomber raids, causing a sharp spike in casualties among German night fighter crews. The defensive MG-131 machine gun had been removed early in the aircraft's service life, but since the radio operator physically could not watch the radar screen and check their six at the same time, defensive armament had to come back. To make this work, a third crew member, a gunner, was added to the cockpit. Because of this decision, the nose of the airplane had to be extended by nearly 31 inches, covered by a special raised canopy section that bulged outward to provide a better field of view. Despite the aircraft's obvious potential, German high command constantly tried to shut down the HE-219 program, led specifically by Luftwaffe Inspector General Erhard Milch. He argued that the fighter took a massive 30,000 man-hours to produce, making it completely unsustainable for the German war economy. There was a fair bit of hypocrisy in this, however. Milch's preferred fighter, the Ju-88G, only achieved those kinds of efficient production numbers later, after more than 800 units had rolled off the assembly line. The situation changed drastically in the spring of 1944, when Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments for the Third Reich, stepped in and ruthlessly overruled Milch. He personally shifted priorities to favor HE-219 production, and after this, Milch finally backed off. Armadas of Allied heavy bombers were launching their devastating strategic air offensive in full force, and there was simply no time left for bureaucratic infighting. When the supply situation for the DB603G engines finally improved, engineers rolled out the ultimate production version of the night fighter, the HE-219A7. This high-altitude aircraft differed significantly from its predecessors. It received much heavier armor, a pressurized cabin, heavier armament, and the most advanced electronic suite of the time. The pilot was protected by thick, armored glass and a massive frontal armor plate weighing around 220 pounds. Notably, both crew members were equipped with ejection seats, a major innovation at the time. The electronics package was impressive. The aircraft was fitted with advanced Lichtenstein and Neptune radars, reliable radios, an IFF system, a radar altimeter, and a blind landing system for poor visibility. To engage targets, the pilot used two separate Revi gun sights, one for the forward-firing armament and one for the Schräge Musik installation. Without exception, all HE-219A7 series aircraft featured two powerful 30mm Mk 108 cannons in the Schräge Musik setup. The main battery varied by specific variant. Some versions carried a combination of 30mm Mk108 and Mk103 cannons in the wing roots, and ventral tray alongside Mg151 cannons. Other loadouts relied solely on lighter 20mm Mg151 cannons, a configuration that became the most widely produced, providing an ideal balance of firepower and weight for intercepting heavy bombers. Almost all of these new fighters were delivered exclusively to Night Fighter Wing 1, the only unit to fully operate the HE-219 in combat. Even though the pilots were critically short of these aircraft, the effectiveness of their night sorties steadily increased. In the field, the HE-219 proved surprisingly easy to maintain. Right from the design phase, engineers made sure ground crews had easy access to all critical components. It got to the point where ground crews actually pieced together 6 complete fighters entirely from spares. These field-assembled aircraft lacked official factory serial numbers and were not on the official books, but they still took to the skies and saw combat. Pilots primarily praised the aircraft for its massive firepower, devastating even with its smallest caliber cannons, and its ammo capacity more than enough for drawn-out night engagements. 300 rounds for the 20mm cannons, 100 rounds for the heavier 30mm. Heavy armor reliably protected the crew, engines, and ammo bays. And it is worth noting that the HE-219 was the world's first operational combat aircraft equipped with ejection seats. Its engines were so powerful that even at maximum takeoff weight, losing one during the takeoff roll was not a death sentence. There are recorded instances of pilots successfully lifting off the runway on just one engine, even without flaps fully deployed. Beyond the A7, Heinkel's engineers had been quietly developing a more ambitious family of variants. The A6 was essentially a stripped-down, lightened version of the baseline, equipped with new DB603L engines featuring advanced 2-stage superchargers and special MW50 and GM1 boost systems. On takeoff, these motors cranked out a massive 2,100 horsepower. At 29,500 feet, they still made 1,750 horsepower. With nitrous oxide injection, even in the thin air at 41,000 feet, the engines maintained 1,400 horsepower. Takeoff weight was slashed to 26,367 pounds. Thanks to this, the rate of climb jumped to 1,811 feet per minute, and top speed hit the 400 miles per hour mark. Armament was restricted to 4 20mm Mg-151 cannons firing straight ahead and all armor stripped out to save weight. The goal was specifically to catch and kill the British Mosquito. However, the Germans only managed to build a handful of these unique airframes. In 1943, Heinkel designers began working on an entirely new series of dedicated variants, designated the B series. The HE-219B1 was a high-altitude 3-seat aircraft. It featured a smoother, more aerodynamic canopy, and the fuselage stretched to nearly 53.5 feet. The wingspan reached 72.5 feet with a total wing area of 536 square feet. Unfortunately, its story was pretty short-lived. On just its second flight during landing, a landing gear strut collapsed and the aircraft was damaged beyond repair. The HE-219B2 was created with one specific goal in mind: to effectively intercept the British Mosquito. To make this aircraft as light and fast as possible, designers stripped out all armor. The fuselage came from the HE-219A5 paired with an enlarged wing. Engineers wanted to equip it with DB603 engines fitted with TK13 turbochargers for better high-altitude performance. When these night fighters reached frontline units, they packed 2 20mm Mg-151 cannons in the wing roots and 2 30mm Mk108 cannons in the Schräge Musik installation. The HE-219B3 was supposed to be even more lethal, with plans for an additional 2 30mm and 2 20mm cannons under the fuselage. However, the technical department ordered engineers to hold out for deliveries of the new Jumo 222 engines. That bureaucratic holdup proved fatal. The engines never arrived, and the fully assembled HE-219B3 never even made it off the ground. With the B series stalled by engine problems, designers took the logical next step and drew up an entirely new generation of variants rather than continue reworking the same basic airframe. In May 1944, the design team started working on two ambitious new projects, the HE-219C One Night Fighter and the C-2 Fighter Bomber. While earlier variants mostly just featured modified wings, this was a major redesign. These aircraft received a completely new fuselage, a redesigned tail section, and reinforced landing gear struts. The crew was increased to 4. The nose section was redesigned into a sleek, streamlined cockpit housing 3 of the crew members. The rear fuselage featured an unusual rectangular shape ending in a pressurized Rheinmetall Borsig tail turret housing 4 13mm MG-131 machine guns for rear defense. The C-1 mounted 2 30mm Mk-108 cannons under the cockpit, while the C-2 swapped these for heavier Mk-103s. Both also retained 2 20mm cannons in the wing roots and the twin-gun Schräge Musik system right behind the cockpit. Both prototypes were fully assembled but suffered the same fate as the B-3. Due to the unavailability of the promised Jumo 222 engines, they never flew. Had they done so, performance figures would have been impressive. A top speed of 416 miles per hour, a range of over 1,110 miles at cruising speed, a climb rate of 1,650 feet per minute, and a service ceiling approaching 39,400 feet. Another highly unusual project was being developed in parallel, this time not by Heinkel's own team, but by the talented glider designer Wolfgang Hütter, who proposed using the HE-219's proven fuselage as the foundation for something entirely different. This was the HU-211, a dedicated high-altitude strategic reconnaissance aircraft. The concept was bold. Take the proven fuselage of the HE-219 and add a massive wooden wing with a laminar flow airfoil. Power was supposed to come from 2 Jumo 222 engines, equipped with an MW-50 water methanol injection system. The wingspan reached a massive 80 feet with a wing area of 428 square feet. Thanks to clever aerodynamics, it was projected to hit 438 miles per hour at nearly 26,000 feet, with a phenomenal range of nearly 5,000 miles and a service ceiling over 42,600 feet. Engineers actually managed to build 2 pairs of unique wooden wings that successfully passed all static load tests, but it was not meant to be. The factory where the finished wings were stored was completely wiped out during a bombing raid. By the end of 1944, the Luftwaffe had taken delivery of over 200 HE-219s. In November, the German High Command enacted the Emergency Fighter Program, a death sentence for all twin-engine piston fighters. Despite strict orders to halt production immediately, Ernst Heinkel practically ignored the ruling and set up another assembly line in Oranienburg. Thanks to this bold move, they managed to roll out another 54 airframes, and 20 converted experimental prototypes were pressed into frontline service. But no amount of determination on Heinkel's part could offset what was happening on the airfields. Allied bombing raids were systematically dismantling the Luftwaffe's ability to operate, and Night Fighter Wing 1 bore the full weight of that campaign. By early 1945, the strength of the wing had been steadily dwindling under the relentless onslaught. The wing remained the only fully fledged operator of this unique fighter. In early April 1945, only a single squadron remained. On April 9th, the pilots received a desperate order to abandon their aircraft, take up arms as regular infantry, and hold defensive positions on the Schleswig border. But before they could even get there, the war ended for them. A final report compiled right before the war ended noted that the HE-219 was a genuinely outstanding aircraft in terms of overall performance. Combat crews adapted to it easily and with very few issues. This made it stand out from many other aircraft of that period. However, constant hesitation from the technical department, along with Erhard Milch's personal dislike of the project, ultimately took their toll. Due to bureaucratic hurdles like these, this promising aircraft never got to play a major role in defending the night skies over the Third Reich.